what AI brings to the table, in my opinion, and where I think people really start getting the power out of it. Once you start thinking about these are employees that I need to manage, like temp employees, you start thinking about creating processes to manage them. That's where the real unlock is and the real power is. If your dev team is going 50x, all of a sudden your product team is the bottleneck and QA is the bottleneck because the tickets aren't coming through fast enough. You're no longer writing code, you're building systems that will let you build systems.
Ryan Weiss is the founder and CEO of Weiss Software. And in this conversation, he brings a practical perspective on AI native software delivery. We get into his framework for AI maturity and show how companies can move their engineers away from simple vibe coding into a director role, commanding small squadrons of parallel coding agents. We also talk about his notion of wave retros, his process for deploying agents and then reviewing and improving their process once they are complete. This helps improve AI workflows in a measured way instead of attempting to jump straight to full autonomy. And finally, we talk about what this all means for the organization as a whole. When your dev team is moving 50 times faster, the bottleneck doesn't just disappear, it moves to other places in the business. And that changes everything about how teams are structured and what skills actually matter. Let's dig in. So maybe let's just go ahead and dive into it. What are the big problems that you think our world is facing as far as like adopting the best usage of AI technology?
So that's a huge question. And my focus has really been around things that are adjacent to software development and then back office automation, those type things. So essentially looking at how to take knowledge work where folks are using computers to kind of do this thing and that thing and accelerate it with AI. And what I see as currently the big unlock is I view AI with agents like Claude or whatever you might be using, something equivalent, to essentially be the modern spreadsheet. And so if you think about how spreadsheets change the world, I think work is going to be where having the ability to do AI native type work and being able to work with these agents will be way more transformative than spreadsheets, but it'll be as essential of a skill. Like you couldn't possibly have a job in an office these days and not know how to use a spreadsheet on any level, right? And so, or you could think about it like the internet or something like that. However, what AI brings to the table, in my opinion, and where I think people really start getting the power out of it, is if you can have a mindset shift away from thinking about it where it's like a tool like Google or a tool like a spreadsheet, and instead you think about it as being, this is a temp employee who has all these wonderful capabilities. They know everything that's on the history of the internet. They can research anything new on the internet that they don't know about. They're able to pull data together really quickly and do analysis. They're able to write really fast. They're able to use just about any kind of tool out there that is, available through these integrations with MCPs and things like that now. And so once you start thinking about these are employees that I need to manage, like temp employees, and you start thinking about creating processes to manage them, I think that's where the real unlock is and the real power is.
I'm looking forward to digging into every bit of that because I think I'm starting to I'm getting better and better, but I know I'm leaving some capabilities on the table because it's a lot of times it's me just driving it by myself. Let's introduce you a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your work and how this ties into the conversation that we're going to have today.
Sure. So my name's Ryan Weiss. I own a hybrid offshore development agency. Our specialty has been essentially making offshore projects accessible to folks who might not be able to hire and manage teams from some of the more affordable areas. Like our dev center is in India. Historically, it's been very difficult to hire Indian teams and get good outcomes. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of those reasons include that you're working with a really affordable resource that can be difficult to communicate with, and that you have to get your work packets in a really good organized fashion that you hand off to them so that they can be effective. So you have to be really good at being able to deal with communication barriers, understand what they're really saying, and then you have to be able to hand off work in an organized fashion, and then you have to create processes that allow being able to review and keep them from getting stuck in all these type things. So that's been a really useful skill set for me to position me for the AI adoption that's come along now that everyone's trying to get into. And my background before I started my company is just as a software architect, where I just was trying to do a lot of thought leadership, learning things that would take a really long time to learn, researching every corner of the internet, and then writing a book about it and sharing with folks, talking at conference and all of these type things. So I just kind of combined all those things together, looking at AI coming out, people not really knowing how to use it, and seeing it saying, this is just like managing offshore teams. You have to deal with the fact that the communication can be misunderstood. You have to deal with the fact that they can get confused and give incorrect answers. So you have to be able to review that stuff very quickly. And for them to be able to move quickly, you have to get work organized so that you can hand it off. And I think because of that, it put me in a position where I was able to spot some approaches that it felt like it took other folks a little longer to pick up on that stuff. But I've been kind of digging in on I never was skeptical about the technology. I just immediately was like, oh my God, robots that can code. And I just looked at it like an engineering problem. Okay, you ask them a lot of questions, they get dumber. So how do you handle this? Oh, okay, well, let's figure out how to ask fewer questions and have them write their work down and hand it to the next person in the chain, right? Like just a real simple trick. But now it seems like there's a whole lot less skeptics these days. And we're getting a lot of folks who are reaching out to us and asking us to come and help their engineers and help their teams understand how to get more value out of these tools and higher quality and all the things that people want on real work, not the stuff you see on YouTube, where it's I built Spotify in a weekend or whatever, like real big stuff that's you have to worry about security and governance and things like that.
Awesome. Definitely need to make sure we get into that as well. I really like the way you're framing the problem. It kind of resonates with kind of my own experience working through this stuff. Because like I've always advocated to intentionally anthropomorphize these agents, like pretend they're I call them AI interns, but it's exactly the same thing you're saying with temp employee. It makes sense. They are really capable. They can do all these superhuman things, very smart, with the unfortunate drawback that they have anterograde amnesia. They're that dude from the Memento movie. And it's kind of cool that you are able to pull from your past, working through communication interactions with remote teams, and also working through your past with like just systems architecture. That seems like you are at the perfect nexus to take advantage of communicating with this new alien technology that we've inherited.
Yeah, I mean that's been pretty much the concept, is thinking about it like you said. This is not a IntelliSense steroided out and more powerful. It's actually an employee that gets exhausted mentally really quick, but has amazing capabilities until they do.
We haven't even really discussed yet, but before this point, I'm interested in your take on that. I do think it's going to be important to walk through like kind of the levels of capability that teams have as they're adopting this technology. And there's all sort of stuff around it, doc-driven development, like you have pulled up on the screen there. So where would you like to lead with this?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like there's some assumptions that I have that I think are pretty true. But if you feel the same way about it, then I think this is a good way to look at it. And essentially what I feel is Bassem, I'm going to mess up his last name, Eldath. He's done this article's been floating around. I think he shared it off LinkedIn and Twitter and all this. And he basically has defined what the 8 levels of agentic engineering are. And I think it's a really useful model that he's put out there. And it maps to kind of what my experience was. And so if you go back, 2 years ago or however long, right when ChatGPT kind of became hot and everyone was, wondering like what this would be like for code. And it was essentially at that time, it seemed like Copilot was what people were gravitating towards. And you just had like this code complete where you could kind of start typing a comment of what you wanted to do. I want to connect the Stripe API, and it would blow out like all the methods you needed to do that in Python or whatever. And people are like, oh, that's pretty cool, but it wasn't really revolutionary or game changing, and most people felt it was pretty limiting. At that time, I believe I was doing a lot of going back and forth to ChatGPT and copying stuff over or whatever. And then it got more interesting. I think Cursor was probably one of the first agents where you had, now you're chatting and they have a little extra in there on top in front of the model that's helping kind of add some extra intelligence over it. And they also had Aider, which was like this command line one at the time. And really, I think the game changed when Claude came out. I feel like that was the first really good one where the agent was doing a great job of helping get work organized and things like that. And so at this stage of the development there, you're now using a tool like Claude, which has this really smart agent, and you're learning how to essentially just prompt the agent in a way where you get better outcomes. So you're starting to learn to tell it following patterns that are consistent with the other patterns in the code, and make sure that you're keeping it dry and not repeating yourself. And you're just being very verbose and sharing. You might be keeping prompts here and there and doing all this stuff to make it a little easier. And you start realizing that, these prompts are getting big, and this agent is having to go and just pull all this stuff in, and then it's starting to get dumb, right? It's hallucinating more often, and it's just the quality of my responses go down the more stuff I ask it. So you start learning context engineering tricks, right? So you start having it give you a prompt to give to the next agent. You shut it down, you give it, I call them continuation prompts, and you might be in that area for a little bit. So now you're starting to keep an eye on your context. You're building your skills a little more, and then you start getting into what's called compound engineering. I had actually put out this process a long time ago called documentation driven development. Within some of the communities I'm in, that language was kind of used for a minute there. And the concept was that you document before you start what you're going to do, you generate code, you test the code, and then after you test, you refactor. And if you really want to do it well, you're doing automated testing here. And if you really want to have the unlock, you do the testing here as the documentation, and then you're really pushing stuff through. But part of what you're doing here is when you're documenting, you document how to build it and what to build, right? So you're updating your best practices constantly. And then I haven't actually looked at it, but everybody tells me that's the same thing as spec-driven development, which I don't know what the official, I know Kiro implements it or whatever, but the concept is out there, and I think it's called spec-driven development now, which I'm assuming is the same thing. And that's all compound engineering. And what this is basically saying is write down a plan, and then what happens is now you can think about the agent as temp employees, and there's just a whole bunch of them sitting behind the one at the desk. And when one of them gets tired, you say, hey, you go home, next one jump in the chair. And so you just have the first agent, the first one, you say, hey, let's create a plan for how to do this. By the way, let's capture what the best practices are for how this architecture is written and all that. How do you run the tests, et cetera. This is how I want the process of working these tickets to be. And now, okay, give me a prompt for the next person in the line. If you're in Claude, you clear the context, or if you're in Cursor, I guess you would close it and open it. They all have a way to reset, essentially get a new agent in the chair, and then you say, hey, here's your prompt to pick up from where the previous person was at, and that will reference your plan that you've created, or your specification, or whatever you want to call it, which will reference all your best practices. And this will help start pushing you towards getting better outcomes, more consistency. But you'll definitely find that just because you wrote it down, it won't follow it. You have to be really familiar with what the process is, your AI software development lifecycle, your AI SDLC, and you have to micromanage it essentially. And that's somewhere around this time. You're also going to be pulling in MCPs and skills. What the MCPs are is just integrations. So you're going to say, hey, we need to have a ticket in Jira. So after we let's pull the ticket from Jira or pull it from Linear. We'll create the plan locally. We'll work on this stuff. Then once we start working, I want you to update Linear or Jira to know that it's in progress. And so now you're just pushing back and forth to Jira or Linear as you're going. You might be using MCPs to look at Postgres or AWS or whatever it might be. But that just allows the agents to be able to look at more things. And then skills is essentially just saying that you're starting to make things more specific to you're putting it into the actual infrastructure of the agent you're using. I haven't worked with Codex or any of these other ones, but I'm sure they all have the same concepts. So essentially, a skill is the same as having your compound engineering as a doc, except you're putting it into a skill that has a prompt to match on. So the agent will know these are all the skills I have. And so if they ask me to create a PR, oh, I have a skill for that. And so I'll look at that specific skill. Or they ask me to get the latest tickets. Oh, I have a skill for getting the tickets. And it just makes it to where you get more deterministic outcomes, that it's going to misfire less often, right? And so what happens is once you get to this level, I have my own version of Basim's piece here that I can switch over to now. Essentially, like, this is how I see the role of the developer at these different levels. When you're going from level 1 to level 5, or level 1 to level 3, you're gonna probably be pushing one agent at a time. You're just starting to learn all the basics and all that kind of stuff. You haven't really gotten to the point where you can fire off multiple agents, and you're really just driving the agent the whole time. You're kind of managing every single aspect of it. Once you get to where you're at the level here where you're pulling in compound engineering and MCPs and skills, to me that's kind of the next level of maturation. And now you're able to run multiple agents because you're using compound engineering, bringing in the MCPs and the skills. It's making it to where you're pulling stuff in from other systems, writing things to systems, and the misfires are less because you're using skills and hooks and all these other Claude native aspects. And I find that I haven't met anyone who can run more than 3 agents using that approach. I know for me, that's where I max out, and that's with, you have a high enough sleep score and you've got just the right coffee and you're in a great mood and you've got the right kind of tickets and you can run 3 agents at once, which is, honestly, is fantastic. You're probably doing 5 to 20x here. And so if you're doing 3 agents, you're doing 15 to 60x what you would normally do on your productivity, right? So that's still a huge boost. However, when you're running at this agent and you're having to micromanage everything, I feel like the quality suffers for a number of reasons. For one, the developer is not focusing on the things that matter most. It's probably not a fun way to spend your day. That's a little bit of a fatigue because you're just sitting there saying, yes, you can read that file. Yes, you can do this. Hey, you forgot to run the test. And you're just micromanaging these agents as they do all of this really sloppy stuff. And so then the next level that you can go to is just from 5 to 6 here, which is where we've spent a lot of time right now and where we're trying to get a lot of our clients to. As you kind of, when we talk to our clients, we try to figure out if they're at the driver level or the supervisor level, or if they're already at the director level, they're probably not talking to us. They're already doing pretty good. They might actually talk to us because if your dev team is going 50x, all of a sudden your product team is the bottleneck and QA is the bottleneck because the tickets aren't coming through fast enough. And so people might talk to us about helping optimize those pieces, but the dev side of it, they're probably feeling pretty good about it at that point. And so how do you get to that point? What you do is approach is being called harness engineering here. And that's the phrase that we like using as well. Essentially what harness engineering is talking about is you're taking your AI SDLC, which it's just going to be your software development process, and you're formalizing that into a harness, a custom harness, which means that you're wrapping Claude in a program that is basically getting into its hooks and its skills and all that. So for example, when you're using Claude, you can override the hook for when it stops, and it'll ask you first, it'll say, I want to stop. And then you can ask it questions and determine whether it can stop. So you can say, why are you stopping? And it'll be like, I'm stopping because, I want to ask this question, and it'll be like, I want you to look at this code. Well, you can say, have you run the test yet? Have you run the type checking? Have you done the linting? It'll be like, no, I haven't done those things. You say, okay, well, get back to work and let me know when you do, right? So what you're doing is you're able to essentially put a custom over Claude or whatever harness you're using that allows you to make it more deterministic and get better outcomes. And the goal of that is if you do it correctly, then you should be able to run your agents and they only check with you at very predictable stages. So in our ideal AI SDLC, you will pull down the requirements, and they're probably not going to be perfect. So the first phase is kind of massaging the requirements and making sure the business requirements look good, and the developer reviews the business requirements. It's like, okay, yeah, this seems good. But it's adding enough clarity to it so that the agent is going to be able to understand very clearly what needs to get done. And so you'll say, that looks good, let's do that. So then the next phase is it will create a dev plan where it will pull out, I'm going to change these files or these classes in these ways or these methods in these ways, and I'm going to create this migration, I'm going to do this. And so then that decomposes into a plan, like a spec at that time. And so then the developer would need to know, hey, this agent has a spec ready for you to review. It's pulled down the ticket, you've reviewed the requirements, now I've created a spec. You review the spec, you say, oh, that looks good, or you change it, say, no, actually, we have a class for that, you should use that class instead, or whatever the advice might be. Oh, this is going to make the performance bad, So you do your architecture review before it gets started. Then the agent goes off and starts doing the work. Then it comes back to you with a branch, with a PR, and it says, okay, I've got the code ready for you to review. That's the next time you want to look at it. You don't want to have to sit there and say, yes, you can read that file, yes, you can run that command, yes, you can, just do the things you need to do and let me know when the code's ready, right?
So if I could somewhat reiterate some of the things that you're saying, and probably switching back and forth between these two models here, like at the beginning was the tab completion. I was fortunate to be around for that. I was working on Copilot at the time. Unfortunately, we kind of got stuck there a little bit too long. Agent IDE just is the interactive conversation that you're having with a thing to build code. It's very much do this, it does it. Then once you get into context engineering and compound engineering, that's where things you start having to think more critically about the meta conversation. It's not so much here's the thing that you make in code. You start thinking about, is the agent's awareness, my AI intern, my temp employee, this is what they're thinking about based on their context, and I can see why they're achieving or not achieving the goals I'm setting for them.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I'm moving away from Bassam's levels, is because I don't feel like you really have to go top to bottom. 4 and 5 kind of merge, in my opinion, and 1 through 3 kind of merge, right? So compound engineering is essentially saying that you've realized you're having to tell the agents the same thing over and over again. So we're just going to write that down. So we'll have a best practices folder somewheres, and here's our architecture best practices, here's our database best practices, here's our UX best practices, here's our testing best practices. And now if I'm doing a task, I'll say, following our architecture best practices and our testing best practices, I want you to work on this ticket, which is another file, and then that file has within it the requirements and then kind of a development specification plan that says, okay, this is how we're going to make this requirement happen by doing this code down here. So it's like if you were handing off the work to a junior engineer in the most pristine shape, that's what it would be. You'd have the specification, which includes requirements and technical details about what to do. And then you'd be referencing your best practices so you don't have to repeat that stuff in every ticket that you're creating.
So in some sense, it was like a prototypical version of what became the skills. It's just like where the skills will go get themselves just in time. The compound engineering is I've got agents.md that keeps track of the main ideas and maybe some references to other files in Markdown that's like best practices.
Yeah, that's like half of it. So half of it is you need to explain what to build and how to build it. So how to build it would likely be a skill, right? So you would, or Claude MD or wherever. At some point in the future, you would likely put those things into some Claude native piece, like the MD files or the skills or commands or whatever. What to build would always be some kind of document. So whether you're going to pull straight down from Jira into Claude and just have the ticket there in context, and then you're just working with it like that. Or if you want to pull it down and put it into a local file, you're going to have somewheres where you're saying, I'm working on this feature right now, and here is the specification for that, which would be one part requirements and one part how to do the work. And so that's what the compound engineering piece brings to the table. And then over time, you'll start to take the how to build it pieces, in my opinion, and you'll start putting that into harness native things, whether it's Claude or Codex or whatever.
So, in your experience, and this is the diagram, or the other one might be more your mental model, where are you meeting people at along this graduation path?
So that's a good question. Some of the folks we talk to are on this 1 to 3 area here, and then some folks we talk to are on the 4 to 5. Like I said, if they're already at 6, they're probably not talking to us, right? Because they're already kind of crushing it. And so in my mental model, that ends up being that you're either at this driver level here, you're really just going one agent at a time and kind of getting in there and just prompting your way around stuff, or you've gotten to the level of sophistication where now you've created your best practices documents. You could think about them as SOPs or standard operating procedures. You've written down how to do things, and now you just tell the agent, hey, using these practices, let's build this feature, and you're giving it links to these files, right? And when you do that, you're able to go to where you can get more work going at one time because you're just able to do it more quickly. Once you're at that level, getting to this level is where you start really moving everything into harness native, and then you start wrapping the harness with some extra intelligence.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, like I alluded to earlier, I'm pretty sure I'm number 2 in your list. I'm running agents, although honestly, even though I think I've gotten pretty good with like preemptively like making skills around the business processes and coding processes that I have, I still find that most of the time I'm running like one agent. Maybe if I have 2 like ridiculously parallelizable tasks, like I'm coding right here and I'm editing a video to cut out ums and uhs or something like that, then I've got 2 agents. But let's make sure at least before I even start to tackle stage 3 here, that I'm as good as possible at stage 2. When people are running these max 3 agents, like what does that look like for a typical developer?
Let me switch to Visual Studio Code real quick, and I can just show you what the documentation looks like on some of the projects I'm doing. Okay, so now we're into my Visual Studio Code. Let me close all of these. And so essentially the way it works is I just create a docs folder. Flexibility is kind of king. So just like with Agile or anything, everyone's going to kind of do things their own way. You might call it specs, you might call it, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't really matter, but you have a folder where you stick all of your documentation, all of your specifications, whatever you want to call it. Within there, I always have a best practices folder. You could call it SOPs, you call it whatever you want, right? And so what's going to happen in here is as I'm working through stuff, I'm going to come through and just create best practices as I go. One of the first ones I'm probably going to create is the AI task workflow, right? This is the process for the agent. So I'm telling it, first thing you do when you're working a task is you pick a ticket from the docs tickets folder, right? So down here we have docs tickets, and if you look, there'll be a ticket folder file here, somewhere's here. And so these are all of the tickets that we have available to work.
The agent itself is curating this list while it's looking through the full tickets, right?
Yeah, so it's I'm at a level on, like when you first start on a project, if you don't have a tickets folder yet, you're going to be like creating your first ticket, and as you create your first ticket, you're going to be creating, a best practice. Like you'll get your first ticket done and you'll say, okay, that actually looks pretty good, so let's create a best practice based on how that ticket looks, right? So give me a best practice so that when you create tickets, they're always going to look the same, and it'll do that. And so then you'll start creating more and more tickets, right? So now I've got harness tickets and I've got regular tickets, and then I've got a list down here, which is all of the tickets that are being worked. And so then I also have a best practice. So for the agent, that I can come in and I can just give it this best practice here and say, I want you to work a ticket, and it will follow this process. So it's going to ask any clarifying questions, and I give it very specific when necessary. Otherwise, it'll just ask you a bunch of questions. You code the ticket. You request review and verification, which means you're asking me to go ahead and test it and review it and tell you whether it's good or not. You run verification tests. You commit and open a PR. So this is, when I was talking about AI SDLC, that's what this is. This is your software development process. Here's all the ticket lifecycle information, et cetera, et cetera. So if you were going to now, let's say I wanted to work on ticket 52 here. Let's just assume that this ticket is not already done. Then you could just copy that ticket and just open Claude and say, I want to work on this ticket following, and then you can just grab this right here, right? So then what Claude is going to do is it'll know, like, okay, I need to grab that ticket and follow this process to work it, and it'll just follow that process for you. So then now I could fire that off, and then I could open another window, another tab, and say, this is 52 or whatever. I could say, following the best practices, work ticket 53, and I can open another one and say, following best practices, open ticket 54. And so then you'll end up having to where you're having 3 going, and you're just having to switch back and forth. Once you get to that level, you're probably going to quickly say, like, wait a minute, I can't really see what's going on. I need to go faster. And so I actually use CMux here. I've heard Claude Desktop is really good now if you use Claude Code on desktop. And so I have a conductor agent here, which will run 5, this has a custom harness in it that's not completely done, but it's done enough now where every time I run, I could just tell it I want to run another wave, which means I'm going to run a number of agents to each work on a ticket. It'll ask me how many agents I want to do. Lately, I've been saying 5, and so it'll create 5 worker agents, and then it will assign work to each one for them to do. And then as you're running in here, it'll show you like which ones are ready, need some input, which ones are running, etc. And then you can switch back and forth between them and manage them better. And then you can take that to the next level where, like I said, as you start nailing down your AI SDLC more and more, you should be able to get it to the point where, say this is your AI SDLC, you're going to ask the agent to take the ticket and refine the requirements and just make sure the requirements look really good. And then it'll go do that, and then you switch to the next one, and maybe the next one has a ticket that's decomposed with the spec and it's ready to go. So you say, go ahead and start writing the code. So that one's now writing code now. This one comes back and is like, okay, the requirements are refined, and now I've decomposed a development spec. And so you review that one. By the time you get done with that, this one's done writing code. It's got something ready for you to review. And so then you go, and in mine, I'll have it whenever you would get to the point where you're ready to review the code and test, it'll give you the steps and say, you need to open the browser to this route, you need to log in with this account, this is how you test it. And so you'll go in and you'll test it, and you come back and say, okay, that actually passed. And then it'll give you the PR, and then you go and you look at the code, you say, oh, the code looks good, and then it goes. You see what I'm saying? So like what you do over time is you get it to the point where you've created a process and you're just assigning work to agents, which are these temp employees. And the game is to make it so that they are only coming to you with things that you actually want to focus on. You're not just having to go and say, yes, you can look at that folder. Yes, you can look at that file. Yes, you can use that tool. You've got it so that the agents have enough autonomy to kind of do everything. And then what you do is you have because anyone who's watching this and thinking a little ahead is going to be, well, I'm going to burn through a lot of tokens. It's like, yeah, they could get stuck, and that could be a problem. But what you do is you just put in your stop hook some safeguards. So like, if they keep coming to you over and over, you say, okay, you're stuck, stop working. And we actually have a custom one that will put a message in Slack saying, this one's stuck, someone go look at it.
Interesting. This is really cool because it's taking what are distinct steps, distinct stages that people could find themselves at. In my mind, it's connecting them together into a continuum. I start out just typing with a thing and it's autocompleting. I figure out that I can just tell the thing what I want it to do, and it's going to, actually write the code without me having to sit there and autocomplete. Getting up to the level where it's like, instead of me just working on a task, I am the curator, the orchestrator that throws tasks over at these agents. But I figure out that even that task itself can, once I learn how I do my own task, once I introspect and watch This is how I typically select my tasks and give them to my agents. Then I write a skill for that thing. And then I'm slowly climbing the ecosystem ladder.
You have to build up skills and infrastructure as you go. And that's where I'm saying, like, you kind of have to build all of these skills. Like, some of them are just a given now. You don't have to learn how to use tab complete and agent IDE. That just kind of happens now. But you have to have, as a person who is managing AI agents, you need to understand how the context engineering and management works. You need to understand how the compound engineering works. You need to kind of know how to use MCPs. I mean, they're quirky. It can, if you're working with more than one client or project, for example, you could have multiple linear accounts. And so you have to know that, like, oh, when I switch from here to here, I need to unconnect it and reconnect it. There's a developer skill set that you have to learn all of these skills while at the same time building up the infrastructure in your repositories that you're working in as you go along, while also figuring out what your AI SDLC, your AI process is, making everything fit that process. So you essentially are you're now, everyone is a fractional CTO when you're doing this. You're having to understand how to create processes and architecture that allows going essentially from requirements ideation all the way to deployed to production, and just automating every step of the way. So I think it's going to be a rough time for folks who haven't been building software very long, in my opinion. And so I'm hopeful that people will kind of really feel the challenge to step it up. It used to be that people preferred having developers who had a lot of depth and not a lot of breadth, right? So, like, I know how to do JavaScript APIs or Java APIs really good. Like, I'm so good at that. I know how to write stored procedures really well and all of that. But I don't really know much else because that's all I focus on. I have a lot of deep knowledge there. That's not as useful anymore.
Yeah, we're back to the full stack engineer being king again.
Full stack engineer, but you also need to be able to manage a team because you're going to be, if you're good. I mean, is somebody really going to want to pay you when you can only push one agent when your coworkers are pushing five? So you have to be able to have the ability to manage these agents. You have to be able to architect the code so that the agents don't get stuck. You have to be able to manage the processes. You have to be able to, you're moving so fast now, you need to be able to wear the product hat, right? Because are you going to stop and be like, okay, I don't really know how this screen should work, and then you go to product and it takes all this time to come back through? Or are you just going to vibe it up and figure it out and deliver it and say, hey, does this look okay, or do y'all want to do something else? Because it's so quick to just vibe it up. You know what I mean? So that means that you need to be able to have some product empathy and be able to design things too. And so my opinion is that the modern software developers are going to be essentially like fractional CTOs that are managing small teams.
It's so amazing. I work with students and I work with people that are halfway through their career, and I work with people that have jumped into software engineering halfway through their career. And it's interesting to see all the different and concerns at this point. I think you're outlining it just about the way I would. It's you have to, whereas you could have specialized in the past, you have to have a breadth of understanding into the product, like a product mindset, a management mindset, architecture. And it's really challenging, right?
It's a big skill set.
What they taught me going through, like, I didn't go to college as a software engineer, so I guess they didn't teach me anything. But the things that you naturally learn that to this point we naturally learned as software developers is like, okay, for loop, while statement, if then, variables list, and then you graduate until you get to the real things that matter today, which is what is the API? Because that's going to be something that influences things in the future as the code evolves. How do you modularize these concepts so that it's easy to talk about certain things to the agent, make sure the work fairly well decouples? These things that are like architectural level decisions are now what you kind of need to know coming out of the gates. And I'm struggling with that. Like how
do you get there?
Yeah, how do you get there?
It's going to be really hard, in my opinion. Like, if I had any advice to share to folks, what I would say is just imagine that you just went to work and now you're a fractional CTO, and you've got the job and you have to figure it out, right? But the benefit that you have is that you have an assistant who knows everything, right? And so what you have to do, in my opinion, like your best chance, is that you don't just like vibe and create AI slop everywhere if you don't know what you're doing. So, if you're trying to figure out what's a good process that we can use for this, or what's a good architecture we can use for this, etc., have it explain it to you. And if you don't understand the concepts, take the time to learn it. So, if it's telling you, well, we need to have some tests to make this move faster, you say, well, what kind of tests should we write? And it'll say, oh, well, we might want to do some acceptance tests and some integration tests and you don't know what those things are. I say, well, what are acceptance tests and what are integration tests? And you just kind of learn as you go. Like for me, where I do that is our design partners are able to vibe up really great looking stuff in Claude now. They don't use Figma anymore. And they're able to make stuff look way better than I am a lot of the times because they know the language of design. And so I don't know it. So I'll get in there and I'm trying to describe and I'm like, well, we need like more room on the side and like, what's that called? And they'll come back and say, oh, that's called a pane. You're like, oh, okay, yeah. And then like, I need what's that called? And so just constantly asking it to tell me what language should I be using here? And then over time, I'm learning the design language as I go, and then I become more effective. I feel like if you want to get that wider breadth, you can build as you learn, but you have to take the time to learn as well. Or letting the tool do everything, you won't learn anything, and you're going to be pretty limited in what you can do, and you won't grow and all that kind of stuff.
Great input. In this conversation, we're climbing those steps, and I want to get to the top and actually look over the top. There's a couple of things that's like on the horizon that right now. So we'll prepare for that in a second. But I want to bring myself up here as well. So one thing that, me as a lowly 4 to 5 level on this diagram person is if I've got my agents and I've got my 3-4 agents that are each working on their own tasks, how do you ensure that they don't intersect too much? How do you, let's actually expand it even. I'm thinking of my question as I'm asking it. How do you write that perfect ticket to make sure that it's a well-defined item? How do you make sure that the tickets you select don't intersect too bad? When they do invariably intersect, how do you deal with that efficiently and make sure that the end result is also good?
Yeah, those are great questions. As far as ticket quality, you just got to iterate with it. And so I'll always just kind of try to create the first one and just essentially complain a lot. Like my litmus is like I'm just kind of lazy. So if I'm having to think too much when I'm looking at it, then I just complain and I say like I don't want to have to read all this stuff to understand what this ticket's about. Like help me be able to look at this and more quickly understand. And then what I encourage for anything is to say, what frameworks should we be using for writing tickets? Just ask it. Like, what's the way that people do this? Like, don't make stuff up. What are the options? And it'll say, oh, you can use behavior driven, or you can use this way or whatever. And then you can just ask it, like, show me what those different things look like, and just tell it, this is what I want, is I want to be able to look at the ticket and quickly understand, and I don't want all of this other stuff about like stress testing and performance testing, and like it'll just give you really verbose, like sketchy tickets. So just be picky and complain a lot until it looks good. And then once it looks good, you say, oh, I like that. Let's do that next time. So write that down. And next time we create a ticket, let's use those instructions. And then when you try it the next time, you say, okay, create a ticket using these instructions. Complain a lot, be busy, be a pain, and then until you're not complaining anymore. And when you give it the description, it does a good job. So that's what I do for that. When it comes to organizing your tickets to where there's not colliding with each other and stuff like that, that's just kind of going to be your own manual review of looking at everything. You can use the agents to you can tell the agents to do it for you and then give you their guess at it or whatever. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to organize and review that. If you're doing good, you're gonna be like thinking about how do I create tickets faster? Like that's when Like when I first go to help someone, the hardest part is like getting enough tickets available. Because I need like 30 tickets to get started, right? You might not have 30 tickets that are ready to go in a good way. So what I'll do often is when I'm first starting on a new project, usually they don't have the right kind of test or enough tests. So you'll say, let's go ahead and just create some tests that the AI agents will be able to use and all of that, and we'll cover this part of your application with tests, and we'll create 30 tickets for testing this, and then I can run through and do, one at a time until I start getting enough infrastructure to do one, and then now I'm doing two, and now I'm doing three, and you just keep running those tickets. So while you're creating value by implementing these tickets, after each time you do something, you just make sure you update your documents, and then once you get to where you're doing two or three of them, you're like, okay, I think we've got enough documents now. How do we make this go faster? Oh, let's start putting some of this in the skills, and that's where you're just continuously improving it until it gets to a point where it's just going on autopilot, right? But it takes a while to get to the point where you feel like your AI infrastructure is done.
An interesting thing that it seems like it's happening, like the skill that's emerging, we just talked about this, so go back into it again. There's like product and management and architecture, but like the skill that seems to be the glue holding everything together is this introspection capability, where like you can say, oh, I see that I myself am doing a task repetitively, and I know what an agent sees, the ability to empathize with the agent and understand this is their perspective. This is how I would teach an AI intern or a temp employee how to accomplish this.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I'm developing. I'm trying to pull up right now. My new thing that I'm working on. I call it Wave Retro, and it's a process. It's just a formalization of that concept of continuously evolving your AI SDLC and maturing your AI infrastructure and your harness. Right here, you can see when it got done, it came back, and so it'll get done running a wave. It'll come back and ask me if there was any friction observations on my side. And I came back and I gave it these notes. Hey, 1Password is constantly asking me for this. Sessions weren't started in an acceptable mode. So this is just all stuff I'm complaining about, right? So then it actually goes to look at all the PRs. Each PR has friction feedback, and then it'll come back and it'll give, these are items that we're recommending for improving for our next round. So and I've asked it, I have instructions for how to do this. There's probably a skill somewheres. And so I told it, I want it organized. Tell me what the pain is. Tell me what the fix is. Otherwise, you're looking at it, you don't really know what it's talking about. So here it's saying operator constantly approving Atlassian MCP reads, and then the fix is investigate which path, whatever. So there it's just asking me to constantly approve Atlassian, like get tickets, do this, do that. And it's like, just use it. Don't ask me, right? And so then this next pane here is 3 of the 9 PRs shipped, confidence. So this is about PR feedback, retro feedback, I think, so not super interesting. This is about like for likes. Let's see. Session start in manual approval instead of in accept edit mode. So this right here means that, whenever you're running in Claude, if I take one of my workers, if you do shift tab, it'll change the mode, right? So I want it to run in accept edits. Here it's asking me to approve 1Password too many times, right? I have to constantly say, yes, you can read that. And so then when it gets done with that, it'll say, before we start the next one, these are the quick wins, and these are the things that we should create tickets for doing in future waves. And so it'll go and I'll knock out the quick wins real quick. Then I run the next wave. So we'll knock out, like we have 5 agents, maybe 3 of them will be reports, and then 2 of them will have like harness improvements in it. And before we kick off that round, we'll knock out a number of harness improvements. And then when I come through the next round, it should go smoother. I keep notes, and you just do that enough times and you'll get in a good state. And so I'm calling that process Wave Retro, and it's just a way to kind of improve your AI infrastructure and skills while you're getting actual real work done.
I really love that. So like I'm building my own mental model for climbing up the ladder here. And it's like I build a process, and then I build a process that builds the process. Is this second level, is that when we're getting into the agent harness? And is that the same thing as dark factory? or is that a different concept?
So that's an interesting question, but I do want to just point out real quick. I loved what you just said, because if you look at my LinkedIn, we're building systems that help build your systems. So that's pretty much exactly what you're saying, and that's what I feel the unlock is that you're no longer writing code, you're building systems that will let you build systems. And this dark factory concept, I don't think anyone has actually, maybe someone has stuck the landing on it, but I think that is like up here, like background agents and all that. What I say is like, just worry about being better than you are now. You know what I mean? So, if you're down here and you're just doing tab complete and autocomplete and context engineering, so you're maybe doing like 5 to 10x with one agent at a time, just try to get to where you're here. And then once you're here, try to get to where you're up here. And if you just keep having a continuous improvement mindset and using something similar to this wave retro concept, you're going to eventually get to a point where whatever that cutting edge is, you're going to be there. I haven't seen anybody do this dark factory thing yet. I'm not saying no one's doing it. I don't know if that's a great idea for all projects right now. The way we're looking at that concept is for bugs, let's say. If a bug comes in, like say you have a Slack channel where people can report them or some kind of bug tracking software. If a bug comes in, you could have an agent create the ticket for you, and you could have an agent rate the complexity of the ticket. Like you could have it create the bug and then decompose it into a dev plan and then say, what's the complexity of this? And so like if it's a Sev 4 or Sev 5 bug, I don't know if you know the severity scales. Those are, so a button isn't enabled when it needs to be disabled. This text is formatted wrong or whatever. You could probably just have it go all the way out to production without having a developer involved, and you just assign it to a QA person and they go test it, right? It's a Sev 4, Sev 5. It's not going to be the end of the world if it's wrong. And so then it's more of, in my opinion, your goal is, what does our AI SDLC look like, and where is the person in the loop at on that process? And for us, what makes sense right now is we want them reviewing the development plans to make sure they're not going to push out some code that takes the back end performance down. All of a sudden the queries are really slow or whatever. And then we want to have someone actually testing it to make sure that it works properly, and that we want you to review the requirements to make sure that it actually makes sense what you're building, So I think the dark factory concept is saying that like there's tickets and then there's code on the other side. I feel like it's a little too ambitious for what I'd be comfortable with right now.
The way you're saying it, I think, is the way people with sense are attempting to adopt, is like, we're not going to like completely remove the human from the loop, but we'll make sure we work to the point. We'll work with the harness, with the factory, with some lights on, until we are confident that for these type of problems, these are low enough risk and with high enough success rate historically that we can turn the lights off in that room. And
yeah, and you'll get there naturally, Like, I mean, if you're not going to be doing well with this stuff if you're the wrong kind of lazy. If you're the kind of person who's just going to sit there and type stuff up, and not be tempted to use whisper flow or not think to write something down. If you're the kind of person who's like, I'm so sick of doing this, how can I make this quicker? You're going to keep going higher and higher, right? Like you won't stop progressing, in my opinion.
Yep. I should definitely, as a good podcaster, YouTuber, if that's what I am now, I should definitely draw attention to the previous two past podcasts. One was entitled The Dark Factory, and a group in Nashville feels like they have stuck the landing on the Dark Factory, but actually reasonably within the kind of concept that you're saying. Like basically they worked with the factory with lights on until at some point for a subset of their processes, they're like, yeah, let's shut the lights off. This works pretty well. It's interesting how people are adopting this stuff, and the smart ones are reasonably removing themselves from being the bottleneck, right?
You got to learn it or you're going to get smoked by it, in my opinion. So.
Oh yeah, that's for sure at this point. I definitely want to keep the floor open for any direction you want to go with this. Potential options is like, what does the future hold? Is there ever going to be we build the systems that build the systems that build your systems? Can we have a generic, yeah. Can you deploy a system that is like it has all the skills to understand how to set up the dark factory on your side? Like, because we could go that route. So, what is the future? What is the last two levels here? We didn't touch on governance and stuff, which is like I need to learn more about that, and definitely make sure that we save time at the end for your own call outs. Like, what would you have people look at for your company?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So as far as predicting the future, my opinion is that if your audience is mostly developers, I feel like you really just have to have a continuous improvement mindset and really stop being skeptical and just start using the tools, start building, and start iterating and improving the rate you're going at. It could be that there's going to be like a whole lot of jobs now because the productivity goes through the roof. It could be that there's 30% less jobs, right? So I would definitely encourage everyone to get out there and get as good with these tools as you can. Finding less and less folks are skeptical these days. What I think, I am building teams right now, but if I was at a company and trying to build teams right now, I think the shape of the teams is going to be less developers, more QA. Because I think QA might have a little resurgence because you really have to test it. And if teams are moving 50 times faster, there's 50 times more code to test. And then the other side of it is on the product side, how do we get things moving that fast? So I just think that I can't imagine that it's not going to be leaner teams that are all AI native. I don't know how you would keep up if you weren't AI native. If the dev team is now going 50x, as product, you can't possibly not be using AI. Like you wouldn't be able to create the tickets fast enough.
So the next bottlenecks are QA and product that are on either side of the development part of the pipeline that just got huge, right?
Yeah, and so we've got a lot of solutions in that space. So what we do is we meet with the stakeholders and we talk about like what needs to get built, and then we take those transcripts and we have cloud repositories that are our product owners that allow us to quickly pull out tickets and things like that. Our designers are working in Claude directly now and creating the prototypes and these type things. So what I'm seeing in the future is smaller teams where people are doing more like broader skill sets, and everyone is going AI native and going really fast, and you're just gonna have to. I don't feel like the code. I know people hate hearing that, but I don't feel like the code's gonna matter that much anymore. I think what's gonna matter more is your ability to evaluate the quality of the code without reading every single line. Like if you got to go in and read every line, that's going to be your bottleneck, right? So how do you avoid reading every line of code? Well, you've got agents that read super fast and can give you reports and can write tests, and so that's what I think the future is going to be, and that's why it says it on my LinkedIn is we're going to be building systems that build the systems, and the people who are going to still be around and making good money doing it are going to be able to do that really well.
Yep, I agree completely. All right, so where do we find you? And why do we find you? Drive us. I want to drive you some business.
Yeah, you can get me on LinkedIn, here. I have a YouTube channel too. I've been pretty lazy about it, but I post content there as well. Essentially, what we're doing right now is we're helping folks step up their AI native game, but we also are a consulting agency, so we build systems start to finish, and we're doing that using these AI native approaches. So if we're trying to build something in the past and it was too expensive, it's probably way cheaper now. We've been specializing really heavily in helping people modernize legacy systems. So a number of our clients right now are rewriting older systems. You might have, some old ASP classic app or WinForms or something like that, and it's been sitting around forever and no one wants to rewrite it because it would just take too long. Well, now you can do that stuff way quicker using these approaches. You can actually create pipelines that will go through and scan the existing system, create the requirements, create your specs, and then you start driving it through with agents. And we've seen the timelines on those projects, go from 3 to 5 years to under a year, or 2 years to 6 months. And so they just become much more approachable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the conversation. I have learned a lot. I feel like maybe I might hoist myself up to the directory level, the directory stage of AI expertise.